I got lost. I didn't know. Yeah.
Janice. Applause the family of Sean Diddy Combs, celebrating after learning his long-awaited fate in court. The family staying stoic as they entered Diddy's courthouse. July 2nd, and after nearly a 2-month trial with 34 witnesses and hours of salacious testimony, a jury of 8 men and 4 women find Sean Diddy Combs not guilty of racketeering and trafficking, but guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Before departing with smiles and waves after hearing the media mogul's partial victory, not guilty on 3 out of the 5 counts covering charges for racketeering and sex trafficking. This verdict has shocked legal experts, and what the jury refused to convict him for says more than what they did. After weeks of graphic testimony, drug trafficking allegations, and high-profile victims, the jury said no to the most serious charges. Why? Some say the jury didn't believe them. Others say they just wanted to get home for the 4th of July. The verdict that nobody saw coming: the jury found Diddy guilty of shuttling workers across state lines for illegal purposes, but not of trafficking Cassie, not of bribery, not of kidnapping, and not of racketeering. The prosecution's entire RICO case collapsed like a house of cards. Sean Diddy Combs was convicted on counts 3 and 5, both related to transporting workers across state lines. The jury agreed that he brought these individuals across state boundaries for illegal purposes. These were the charges involving what prosecutors called ex-workers, people who were transported interstate as part of what the government claimed was a criminal enterprise. The judge is currently deciding right now whether Combs will actually be released today. His defense arguing that since the music mogul was acquitted of the most serious crimes, he should be able to go home. Once court was adjourned, family members cheered today's verdict. But here's the shocker that has everyone talking. The jury completely rejected the charges involving Cassie and Jane, the high-profile alleged victims whose stories dominated headlines. For months, they didn't see these women as trafficking victims the way prosecutors presented them. Cassie's claims dismissed. Jane's testimony not credible enough for conviction. The failure to convict on these trafficking charges created a domino effect that destroyed the government's biggest weapon. Count 1. The racketeering charge under RICO. This was supposed to be the knockout punch, the charge that could have buried Diddy for decades. Instead, it became the prosecution's biggest embarrassment. The RICO disaster that has prosecutors scrambling for a RICO conviction. Prosecutors needed to prove just to underlying criminal acts from 6 possible categories. They had the interstate transportation of workers. That was easy, but they needed one more, and that's where everything fell apart in spectacular fashion. Prosecutors showed images of drugs, pills, wire transfers. They even claimed there was a systematic drug operation and possible witness tampering, but the jury wasn't convinced. Or maybe they just didn't want to deal with it. The prosecution presented what they thought was overwhelming evidence of controlled substances and distribution, arguing this could serve as the second RICO predicate. Combs' son, Christian, telling ABC News how happy he is. "Hey yo, we love y'all. We love everybody watching. So happy. Pop's coming home. God bless. God bless the whole world." What was going through your head when the verdict was read? The jury specifically asked about the substances during deliberations, which gave prosecutors hope they were seriously considering this evidence. But then came the gut punch. They ultimately decided this mountain of drug evidence didn't meet the legal standard for racketeering. Think about that for a second. Prosecutors laid out alleged evidence of pills, various controlled substances, and what they characterized as a coordinated drug distribution operation spanning years. They connected financial records to drug purchases, witnessed testimony to drug distribution, and physical evidence to systematic criminal activity. The jury looked at all of this and said, "Nah, not convinced." They also rejected evidence of alleged bribery, kidnapping, and other criminal acts as sufficient for the second RICO requirement. This wasn't just a rejection of the evidence. It was a complete dismissal of the prosecution's theory about how Diddy operated his alleged criminal empire. The drug ring allegations rejected the supposed criminal enterprise shattered in court. Now Diddy's team is already preparing their PR comeback. Kira, no decision quite yet from the judge, just a couple of minutes ago. Though I can tell you, we saw the Combs family van pull up to court once again, presumably to hear this decision on whether or not Combs will be released. The deadline that the judge gave both the prosecution and the defense just passed a couple of minutes ago. The sentence that will infuriate victims. Legal expert Christopher Melchor, who's been covering this case for CBS and major outlets, dropped a bombshell about what these convictions actually mean in real time. The maximum sentence for the charges Diddy was convicted on is 10 years. But here's the kicker. There's no mandatory minimum. Melchor expects Diddy will serve just 3 to 5 years in prison. That's it. 3 to 5 years for everything the government accused him of doing. He'll get credit for time already served, which reduces his actual remaining time, plus 54 days of good behavior credit per year against his sentence. This represents a massive victory for Diddy's defense team and a crushing defeat for prosecutors, who swung for the fences with RICO charges and whiffed completely. What could have been a life sentence turned into what amounts to extended vacation from his music empire. According to Melchor's analysis, this was clearly a compromised verdict caused by holdouts on the more serious charges. His assessment: the government overcharged with RICO, confusing the jury and making conviction on the most serious charges nearly impossible to achieve. They were set to opening scene. Slow-motion footage of Diddy walking out of the courthouse, flanked by lawyers and family. Flashbulbs from cameras go off. Overlay text. Verdict in. Diddy found guilty, but not for what you think. Dramatic music swells. Naratorn Janice. Audience murmurs. The family of Sean Diddy Combs stood up, tears welling in their eyes. But not for the reason you might think. July 2, 2025. After nearly 2 months of courtroom warfare, endless testimony, and a public spectacle unlike any other, the verdict finally came down. And it shook the nation to its core. Not guilty on racketeering. Not guilty on sex trafficking. Not guilty on kidnapping. But guilty on 2 lesser charges. Transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy walked away from this courtroom not a free man, but far from what anyone expected. It wasn't the charges everyone had obsessed over that stuck, it was the ones most people overlooked. And the outcome has left the public divided, angry, confused, and above all, asking how. Cut 2. Montage of protesters outside the courthouse, chanting, "Let's go back and break this down." Act 1. The trial of a tycoon, Sean Combs, hip-hop mogul, media magnate, Grammy winner, and fashion icon, the man behind Bad Boy Records, CROC Vodka, Revolt TV. But behind the platinum records and lavish red carpets, prosecutors painted a very different picture. One of manipulation, coercion, and a dark empire powered by fear and exploitation. The federal government brought 5 charges against him: racketeering, sex trafficking, drug distribution, kidnapping, and interstate transport of individuals for unlawful activity. The linchpin was RICO, the racketeer-influenced and corrupt Organizations Act, a tool usually used to take down mafia dons and cartel leaders, but this time, they pointed it at a music mogul. Over 34 witnesses took the stand. From former assistants and dancers, to bodyguards and alleged victims, the testimonies were brutal. Cassie Ventura, Diddy's longtime partner, testified under a pseudonym. Her claims: she was controlled, manipulated, flown across state lines, and at times drugged against her will. Jane Doe, another accuser, described eerily similar experiences, alleging she was forced to take part in sex acts for Diddy's business associates. While under surveillance by his inner circle, prosecutors brought the receipts, literally. Wire transfers, hotel bookings, private jet manifests, and surveillance footage. They connected the dots, and argued it all pointed to a systematic pattern. Combs wasn't just a celebrity, he was running a criminal syndicate hidden in plain sight. But the defense team came prepared. They called their own witnesses. They painted the accusers as opportunists. They argued the government was overreaching, criminalizing the lifestyle of a rich man in the music industry. They hammered holes in timelines, questioned motives, accused the feds of cherry-picking, and when the jury went into deliberation, the world held its breath. Act 2. The verdict no one saw coming. 2 days of deliberation. That's all it took. Count 1. Racketeering, not guilty. Count 2. Sex trafficking, not guilty. Count 3. Transportation for illegal sexual activity, guilty. Count 4. Kidnapping, not guilty. Count 5. Transportation of individuals for prostitution, guilty. The media scrambled. Legal analysts gasped. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Diddy walks. Hashtag justice for Cassie. Hashtag industry protected. What does this mean? The jury rejected the idea that Combs was running a criminal empire. But they agreed that he used his wealth and power to move women across state lines for illicit purposes. It was a technical conviction, yes, but one with enormous implications. Act 3.
I'm still standing.
Expanded transcripts section. The jury's verdict, bail twist, and defense strategy. How Diddy got off easy as the courtroom clock ticked past 1 p.m. Both legal teams turned in their final arguments, wrapping up hours of intense legal wrangling. These weren't just any last-minute remarks. This was the final push, the last desperate attempt to tip the scales in favor of their client or against him. The defense team, stern and polished, made their plea: Sean Diddy Combs should be allowed to walk free. They argued that since the jury had acquitted him of the most serious charges, it would be unjust to continue holding him. Behind the defense's polished confidence, though, was a bitterly divided verdict that tells a story far more complicated and far more troubling than the public may realize. The holiday weekend compromise that changed everything. Here's where things take a dark turn and why many legal observers are calling this verdict a travesty dressed up as compromise. According to multiple legal analysts, the jury was sharply divided on some of the most serious allegations, trafficking and racketeering charges. Some jurors reportedly pushed hard for a conviction, but others flatly refused to budge, staring down the barrel of a deadlock, with July 4th just around the corner. The jury found a middle ground: convict on the lesser charges, let the rest go, and go home. The victims left in the shadows. The timing says it all. Jurors had been trapped in that courtroom for weeks, overwhelmed with mountains of evidence and emotionally heavy testimony. They were tired. The nation's birthday weekend was approaching. Fireworks, family barbecues, and beach vacations beckoned. The desire to break free from this emotional cage was palpable, and so, the jury returned guilty verdicts on counts 3 and 5 charges involving the transportation of workers across state lines for unlawful purposes. But they struggled immensely with count 1, the racketeering charge. That single count could have changed everything. Legal experts say this behavior reveals a devastating truth. The jury found some parts of the prosecution's story compelling and undeniable, but ultimately couldn't wrap their heads around the full scope of the racketeering charges. The complex nature of federal RICO law, requiring 2 or more connected criminal acts tied to an overarching enterprise, was either too technical, too overwhelming, or too unbelievable in this context. Taking the easy way out. Rather than diving deeper into the web of organized criminal activity Diddy was accused of orchestrating, the jury seems to have taken what some are calling the path of least resistance. Instead of wrestling through legal complexities, they chose to convict on what they could unanimously agree upon. That decision sent shockwaves not only through the courtroom, but through the national conversation around justice for victims of trafficking and abuse. Legal commentators have already begun to question whether justice was truly served, or whether convenience won out over accountability. The stunning bail twist that has everyone talking, and just when the courtroom thought the twists were over, another bombshell dropped. Despite being found guilty on federal charges related to transporting individuals for illegal purposes, Diddy may actually be released on bail before sentencing. You read that right. The judge shocked everyone, prosecutors, reporters, and even Diddy's own legal team by announcing that he would consider granting bail. That almost never happens in federal trafficking-related convictions. In fact, it's virtually unheard of. The judge claimed he needed time to review the statutes and examine prior precedent cases, especially under the Mann Act, a key statute used in this case. He even requested both legal teams provide past examples where bail was denied or granted after similar convictions. Sources inside the courtroom say a $1 million bond is already being discussed. If approved, it means Diddy could walk free today, while awaiting sentencing, which could be months away. That alone would flip the entire narrative around this trial on its head. What about the victims? What about the prosecution's earlier claims that Diddy posed a serious threat, that he might flee or intimidate witnesses again? Those warnings, it seems, may now be swept aside. Credit for time already served, and what that means to make matters worse for the prosecution. Diddy's defense pointed out that he's already been in custody for roughly 9 months. That time will be credited toward whatever sentence he ultimately receives. Now, even though each count carries a maximum sentence of 10 years, insiders say it's highly unlikely the judge will max him out. That means even if he is sentenced to 5 years, 9 months are already gone. With good behavior, that number could shrink dramatically. So what happens next? If the judge does grant bail, and the sentence ends up being lenient, Diddy could go back to his mansion, his fashion empire, his music legacy, and his millions in revenue. While his accusers are left with little more than emotional scars, and a justice system that didn't deliver. The evidence the jury refused to see. What's perhaps most confounding in all this is just how much evidence the jury brushed aside. The prosecution spent weeks detailing Diddy's alleged criminal empire. They showed flight records of interstate worker transportation surveillance footage from hotels and private parties, alleged drug trafficking patterns tied to controlled substances, financial trails they described as organized bribery, witness testimony recounting incidents of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and intimidation. They laid out a meticulous argument, and yet, the jury only latched onto one portion: transportation. Why? Some believe the jury simply didn't buy the broader theory that these actions formed an organized criminal enterprise. Others think the witnesses, some of whom were former employees, disgruntled associates, or had public reputations, weren't seen as credible enough to justify harsher charges. But this raises uncomfortable questions. Are powerful figures like Diddy protected not just by wealth, but by complexity? Has the legal bar been set so high that unless the criminal operation is as simple as a drug cartel, juries just won't see it as organized crime? The defense's masterstroke long-game strategy that worked from the very beginning. Diddy's legal team focused on dismantling the RICO case. They said the prosecutors were trying to stretch the law, turning entertainment industry practices into criminal conspiracies. Their message: Diddy is not a mob boss. He's an entertainer, a businessman. Maybe flawed, maybe arrogant, but not a criminal mastermind. And it worked. They pounced on every hole in the prosecution's logic. They made jurors question whether lavish parties, private jets, or bodyguards necessarily equated to organized crime. They argued that blurred lines in Hollywood and the music world shouldn't be mistaken for evidence of trafficking or racketeering. Their goal was never to prove Diddy innocent of all wrongdoing. It was to raise enough doubt, just enough to shield him from the most damning label, RICO. And in that, they succeeded. They succeeded.
Where we rushing to? Why are we rushing? Where we going? Somebody? Wow.
In what many are calling a turning point for high-profile celebrity justice in America. The recent verdict in the federal case against Sean Diddy Combs has stunned both legal analysts and the public. The trial, originally touted as a historic moment for accountability in the entertainment industry, has ended not with a thunderclap of justice, but with a fizzle that many critics believe sends a dangerous message to future victims and survivors. Framing the case, not mafia, just business. From the outset, the defense was strategic, even surgical, in how they positioned Diddy's empire and alleged behavior, rather than allow prosecutors to portray the case as a sprawling criminal conspiracy akin to a mafia syndicate. Diddy's lawyers worked tirelessly to reframe the entire narrative. This wasn't a mob operation, they argued. This was simply business. Messy, complex, controversial perhaps, but not criminal. They urged the jury to resist equating celebrity business dealings, however shadowy they may appear, with organized racketeering. It's a tactic that clearly resonated with jurors who may have been uncomfortable placing the hip-hop mogul in the same category as mafia bosses. Weakening the prosecution, doubt and discrediting witnesses. Another pillar of the defense's success came from their meticulous takedown of prosecution witnesses. Over and over again, they chipped away at credibility. Defense attorneys raised questions about motives, memory, consistency, and even emotional authenticity. What prosecutors framed as harrowing survivor testimony, the defense sought to undermine as opportunism, exaggeration, or fabrication. Prosecutors did present significant evidence, extensive financial trails, communication records, and the testimony of multiple women who claimed they were trafficked or coerced. And yet, that evidence failed to meet the burden of proof in the eyes of the jury. According to reports from NBC News and other courtroom observers, the atmosphere shifted dramatically after closing arguments. Diddy's family, who had remained relatively subdued throughout the proceedings, were seen exchanging smiles and quiet gestures of relief as the jury handed down its mixed verdict. For them, the battle may not be entirely over, but the war seems largely won. What was he convicted of? Let's be clear, Sean Combs was not fully acquitted. The Bad Boy Records founder now stands convicted on 2 charges, both relating to prostitution-related offenses involving the transportation of individuals across state lines. These are not minor charges by any means, but they pale in comparison to the looming specter of RICO, the federal racketeering statute designed to take down criminal organizations. The fact that Diddy's high-powered legal team successfully dodged a RICO conviction while still leaving room for conviction on lesser but significant charges points to a highly calculated defense strategy. This wasn't an all-or-nothing defense. It was a nuanced game of legal chess, and in many ways, they won. The Cassie and Jane acquittals, a blow to the prosecution. Perhaps the most shocking element of the verdict came with the jury's decision to acquit Diddy of charges related to two of the most high-profile alleged victims, known in court as Cassie and Jane. Cassie, a former romantic partner of Combs, had previously filed a civil suit against him, a case that had garnered national headlines and tremendous social media support. Her story had been detailed in both legal filings and public statements, painting a picture of prolonged abuse, manipulation, and trafficking. To many observers, hers was the anchor case, the emotional and narrative centerpiece of the prosecution. And yet, the jury rejected the trafficking charges associated with her entirely. This may suggest that jurors saw her relationship with Diddy in a different light, perhaps as consensual, however toxic, rather than criminally coercive. Or it could indicate that the defense's challenges to her credibility had their desired effect. Either way, the acquittal deeply undercuts the public image of this trial as a moment of reckoning for survivors. The Jane case was structurally different but equally critical. Jane's allegations, involving cross-state coercion and threats, formed a crucial link in the prosecution's RICO narrative. If the jury had believed these claims, it might have validated the broader idea of an enterprise, a requirement for any RICO conviction. Instead, the jury found insufficient evidence. They were not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that what happened rose to the level of federal trafficking under the law. That single decision may have unraveled the entire theory of organized criminal behavior. A chilling message for future victims. This verdict reverberates far beyond the courtroom. For survivors of abuse and trafficking, especially those brave enough to come forward against powerful, wealthy men, the outcome is nothing short of chilling. If the U.S. government, armed with federal resources, legal experts, digital forensic evidence, and a media spotlight, can't win a RICO conviction against someone with multiple accusers and years of documentation, what hope is there for smaller cases? For everyday survivors? It's not just about this one trial. It's about the precedent. It's about the message sent to every victim who's watching from the sidelines, debating whether or not to step into the light. Why RICO failed. A case study in legal complexity. Legal scholars and future prosecutors will undoubtedly study this case in depth. The RICO statute, powerful as it may be, is notoriously difficult to prosecute. It requires a clear demonstration of a structured criminal enterprise, with interlinked acts and a coherent operational hierarchy. In celebrity cases, where relationships are murky, boundaries are blurred, and business often overlaps with personal life, that clarity can be hard to achieve. And when the defendant has virtually unlimited financial resources, world-class legal representation, and a media-savvy defense narrative, the challenge becomes Herculean. The government's inability to simplify and humanize the RICO elements may have played a major role in their failure. Jurors may have found the charges too abstract, too complex, or simply too confusing to justify conviction, especially when the defense planted seeds of reasonable doubt in every corner of the case. Justice for the rich or justice denied. In the end, many will see this verdict